So welcome everyone to the Tang Center for Silk Road Studies first lecture in our annual colloquium series. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mariachiara Gasparini, who actually gave a wonderful talk. Was it last week? 2 weeks. Couple of weeks ago, right? At the Asian Art Museum on Silk Road textiles. And given her work on material from Turfan and Dunhuang, it seemed an opportune time to have her discuss Buddhist textiles in particular. I think it's a corpus of materials that is not usually looked at or addressed. They're often ignored and relatively unknown, drowned out, I would say, by the study on Buddhist manuscripts, Buddhist sculpture, and Buddhist mural painting. So we're very excited at the Tang Center to have her here. Chiara received a Ph.D. in Transcultural Studies within the Global Art History cluster from Heidelberg University, Germany. And she received a Ph.D. based on a doctoral work on the transfer of Northern Silk Road textile imagery into Europe. She has taught at Santa Clara University and San Francisco State University and just accepted a position as visiting assistant professor of Asian art at the University of California Riverside. Her research focuses on Central Asian textiles, material culture, wall painting, artist practice, and Sino-Iranian and Turko-Mongol interactions. She is the recipient of numerous grants for her work, including from the German Research Foundation and the German Council for Science and Humanities. She has written extensively on the art of Silk Road textiles, including the recent articles, Sino-Iranian textile patterns in trans-Himalayan areas, also a mathematic expression of art, Sino-Iranian Uyghur textile interactions, and the Turfan Textile Collection in Berlin, and woven mythology, the textile encounter of Makara, Senmerf, and phoenixes. Her book, Transcending Patterns, Silk Road Cultural and Artistic Interactions Through Central Asian Textiles, is forthcoming. It will be published by the University of Hawaii Press in 2019. So please help me welcome Chiara to Berkeley.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Thank you very much. In 2010, I was asked by Lilla Rasser-Smith, that is the curator of the Central Asian Art Gallery in the Museum of Asian Art in Berlin, to look at the Turfan Textile Collection that was gathered and assembled during the Turfan Prussian archaeological expedition at the beginning of last century along the northern Silk Road, around the Taklamakan Desert. Specifically between 1912 and 1914 by Albert Grünweder, that at the time was the deputy director of the Ethnological Museum, and Albert von Lecoq, that was his assistant. Unfortunately, part of the material brought back to Berlin was lost during World War II. But what survived is today in Dahlem in Berlin, and a small part in St. Petersburg at the Hermitage Museum. This collection will be soon moved to the Humboldt Forum, that is this giant project, one of the most expensive in Europe actually, that is the reconstruction of the Prussian palace in the Museum Island in Berlin, where all the other museums are located. And it's called the Humboldt Forum, and will be open, I think, in 2020. However, I had to wait a couple of years, and in 2012, thanks to a grant from the International Dunhuang Project at the British Library, I microscopically analyzed and cataloged the so-called Turfan Textile Collection. Although the collection as a whole can be dated between the 7th and 14th century, in fact it includes also some Mongol material that, according to the archives in the museum, were purchased during the expedition, so were not found in situ. 95% of the textile fragment was produced between the 7th and 10th century and used in Buddhist context. So they were related to a Tang period in China and also to the second Uyghur Khaganate in the western regions, so in Gansu and Xinjiang. The Uyghur were a Turkic population coming from the north that in the 9th century established their capital in Kocho, or Gaochang in Chinese, near the modern Turfan. Many of the fragments in the Turfan collection were indeed discovered in Kocho, as well as in other Buddhist caves close to Turfan, also in Kizil, along the northern Silk Road. Of course, without performing radiocarbon analysis, we cannot confirm the date of the fragment, but based on a technical and stylistic analysis, one can assume that many were produced or at least used after the 8th century, when Turfan and Dunhuang recorded the presence of Uyghur and also Tibetan people. Particularly evident, in fact, is the mutual pattern correspondence between wall paintings and textiles, as I will show you later. Many textiles from other collections, however, come from the cemetery of Astana. This is a picture I took a couple of years ago that is not too far from Kocho, and the collection and the material gathered from the tombs are very much made in Tang styles. They have very strong Tang features. However, they are a good collection to compare to those discovered in Turfan. These textiles are now in the Turfan Museum and also in the Xinjiang Museum in Urumqi. This is a plan of Kocho, as designed by Albert Grünwedel, and is now in the museum in Berlin. And he found the majority of textile fragments, such as sutra wrappers or covers, canopies, and banners, in places that he marked with Greek letters. Those are just 4 of the main sites where the textiles were discovered, especially in what he called Library K, where many documents were collected together with the textile, or also Alpha there. And here is the southern entrance of Kocho as it appears again a couple of years ago. Other documents and textiles were discovered in the Toyuk caves, not too far from Kocho, in a place that he classified as manuscript rooms. And here is also in the Toyuk village is where we have still today the house of Albert von Lecoq, and where it was the location where the archaeologists stayed during one of the 4 expeditions. So, who created these items? Why different textiles were combined together? How did the textiles circulate inside and outside temple or monasteries and caves? Official and merchant were both engaged in the trade of textile at a micro level. The price was based on quantity, quality, and design. Although pattern textiles were generally woven for the royal and imperial elite, high-ranking officials tended to emulate the nobles in the consumption of luxury, including design reserved for the afterlife. Soldiers, by contrast, were generally paid with bolts of light monochrome textiles that were then exchanged for other goods in the local market or cut into smallest pieces to sell or exchange again. In the Tongdian, Encyclopedic History of Institution, Duyo itemizes the number of pieces of silk collected in taxes just before the Han Lushan rebellion that occurred between 755 and 763, led by General Han Lushan, who was of Turkic of Sogdian origin, against the Tang dynasty, when taxes were paid according to Zuyondiao system that was based on a milk grain, corvée labors, and textiles. The payment of tax in silk is also recorded in a fragment of yellow Chinese damask discovered in the cemetery of Astana, tomb 226, which reads, first year of Jin Yun reign period, that will be 710, 1 board of fine linen damask paid as textile tax. Xuanliu County recorded to be sent to you, Mother Chongqing and Sichuan. So during the time period in this intra and extra monastery circulation of goods, high-ranking officials used to sacrifice some of their wealth in support of Buddhist communities. The situation of monastic communities, however, radically changed after the Han Lushan rebellion. Before the Tang, there were almost 3 million of Buddhist believers, and the monks themselves were a luxury for the state. The religious title represented a way to escape taxation or corvée service that were due to the state. There were 3 types of monks. Official monks, who were sponsored by the state and responsible for official ceremonies and imperial cults. Private monks, who were fed and clothed by aristocratic families. And common monks, who lived in the countryside in isolation or as members of small groups. Thanks to their expertise in specific craft, monks and nuns were often called to practice their skills and to help private individuals in search of sanctity or to perform mortuary services. Remunerated with an offering, they began to accumulate goods. In theory, a monk could not be taxed because he produced and owned nothing. However, due to the major fiscal evasion which resulted after the Han Lushan rebellion, the situation changed, and monks and nuns were forced to pay taxes in silk. When a monk died, his possessions, which were accumulated thanks to the offering of high-ranking officials and commoners, were left to the community or sold, and included clothes and offering received as payment for religious services. The redistribution and the circulation of gifts were theoretically based on a belief in the endless accumulation of karma. The sharing of their own belongings might help people to enjoy other bodhisattva and to wish for the spirit of the body. Nevertheless, charity turned into a profitable enterprise that also included the organization of auctions like those that took place in Dunhuang. And this is a representation of a few monks in front of boxes, possibly include kasaya or other type of textiles. So the circulation of textiles, of course, as I said, involved also Uyghurs, who especially during the Han Lushan rebellion and later provided the Chinese with horses. It is recorded that the Chinese paid heavy horses with 40 or even more boards of silk. When the Tang went to power in 618, only 5,000 horses were left in the empire. But before 700, their horses had increased of 700,000 divided in 8 pasture lands. The silk was transported to the western region by the Sogdian, the merchant or middleman of the Silk Road. Sogdiana was part of the Eastern Iranian or Sasanian Empire. And Uyghur acquired also Sogdian and Persian textiles. So material culture of the second Uyghur period in Xinjiang and Gansu, in fact, appears very much influenced by the Sogdian style. In many respects, the Sogdian were the tutor of Uyghur in trade and broad question of culture. Possibly, the Uyghur were the first who created silk tapestry and golden weaving that later became highly appreciated by the Mongols in the 13th century. About 350 pieces counted in the collection, and these are just a few of them, are mainly made of silk, hemp, and ram in different structures, sometimes combined with papers, leathers, and bamboo, made in simple or complex weaving structure, dyed or embroidered in gauze or also silk tapestry. As I said, the religious textile items were discovered with a large quantity of documents in various languages and scripts, not only of religious nature, but also concerning civil and legal matters. Like textile, paper was also recycled, and sometimes the two were combined together. A few fragments in the Turfan Textile Collection show remains of paper on the surface, as you can see. suggesting that they were used as a sutra, document covers, or wrappers, sometimes also constructed with other material, such as bamboo. This is a sutra wrapper. We have 3 examples. One is very damaged in the Turfan Textile Collection, and this is basically, the structure is similar to the one used for sushi roll today, just to give you an idea. So framed, in this case, with the silk gauze, embroidered with circles of flowers. So both Kaosho Library K and Dunhuang Cave 17, that is the caves in the cave in Dunhuang where many documents were discovered, disclose an incredible quantity of material that, since their discoveries, has offered the opportunity for many scholars around the world to study and publish about the societies living in the area during the early Middle Ages. A couple of documents from Dunhuang, especially those in the British Library, have confirmed the recycling and the use of both textiles and paper, as well as provide a list of textile items and names. This document, for instance, on the recto, shows a table of weights and measures used during the time period, among which it is included also silk fibers as a measure of length. As we have seen, textiles themselves were used as writable surfaces and therefore should be considered as documents. In the Turfan Textile Collections, there are 3 interesting pieces that are important documents which tell us more about production and use of religious items in both Buddhist and Taoist contexts. A banner from Toyuk in this triangular shape that I will discuss later, with small stamped golden motif. The banner, like you can see here, they are stamped, not woven. The banner is made in one of the 3 basic textile structures called tabby, that is the first one here, and then we have twill and satin, that are the 3 basic weaving structures to create any other textile in the world. These are the 3 basic foundations for textiles. So as you can see, this banner was created in tabby or plain or basket, sometimes called. That is the simplest one. So it's not an incredible complex structure. This description on the banner is interesting because reads as, in the Jinzhou County Unreadables, a goldsmith resident in the county of Unreadable who works metal bestowed and set up a banner at the Haotian temple 8 months of the Yimao year. According to it, the banner so was produced in the Jinzhou County, where Chang'an, the capital of the Tang dynasty, was located. So in 713, the Tang court, in fact, changed the name of the province in Jinzhou, which was used for 550 years, except in the 10th century for a very short period of time. The banner would confirm the coeval Buddhist and Taoist worship in Turfando, because according to Ron Xinjiang, professor of history at the Beijing University, we have apparently there was also a Taoist Haotian temple that he called, I give you the example here, Haotian Guan. One was in Chang'an and the other one, the Haotian Gong in Kaosho. So this will confirm that most likely this banner was all created in Chang'an and sent to the Taoist temple in Kaosho, or maybe produced there directly in Kaosho as a devotional item. Most importantly, this is one of the first examples of gold on Chinese textiles. The metal pigment, however, is clearly stamped, as I said, rather than incorporated in the weaving process in the form of thread, as it appeared in later textiles. According to the history of the Shui dynasty, the weaving of metal thread was acquired with the import of Western textiles, possibly in the 6th century, although in China it became popular much later. And actually the first examples are discovered in Qinghai, in the Royal Tibetan tombs in Dolan. And possibly actually start with the Uyghur. In chapter 68, we can read, and I quote, "Persian presented to the emperor a beautifully woven gown of jin in golden thread. The emperor ordered He Chou to reproduce it. He began to weave and succeeded in the making of a type even more beautiful than the one sent as a gift. The emperor was extremely satisfied. Exceptional Buddhist examples of golden embroidery or weaving, however, are those discovered in the Buddhist Famen temple not too far from the Tang capital. And this is just one of those. It's a mini jacket, possibly used for a mini figurine or a sculpture, mini sculpture. And then we have a skirt made in the same style and same material. So beside this banner that, as I said, is related to the Taoist context, we have two other fragments in the Turfan collection, two banner legs or raffle probably. The first one includes a Brahmin inscription that reads as Natikishka, and I have to thank people in Berlin in the, at the Science Academy that read all the Turfanese languages for the translation. So the first most likely might be a Brahmin inscription and a derivation of the Indian law word Natya, that means dancing or mimicking representation, or a form of Tocharian B, the original language of Kucha, where the Kizil caves are located, that spread to Yanji and the Turfan area around the 7th century. In that case, the inscription as a whole would be a female name, reading Tapakishka, meaning little mirror, a name that is very popular, was very popular in the area. The second banner leg from Shorchuk was analyzed, translated, and published by Michael Perrault, who identified the language as Tocharian A. So both Tocharian A and Tocharian B are extinct Indo-European languages, possibly used between the 6th and 8th centuries. The text discovered suggested Tocharian A was used in the area of Turfan in Buddhist context, while Tocharian B was used in the area of Kucha and also in other locations where Tocharian A was spoken. And the document discovered in the Taklamakan also suggests a third form that will be Tocharian C that was used along the southern Silk Road, as you can see from the map. So the description on this banner leg reads as, Turkshanch has made this pack. May I throw the wish for the Buddha worth no longer be a woman. Apparently, however, the banner does not prove that this was a language spoken, but only that the religious scribe who wrote the inscription was familiar with Tocharian A. Also, according to Perrault, the name Turkshanch does not sound Tocharian, but rather Old Uyghur, carrying in the Sogdian feminine suffix ench. Tocharian A was in fact most likely a monastery language, and it is interesting to notice that the scribe was possibly trained in both Tocharian and Old Uyghur. So what does it mean? What does this inscription tell us? Not only do this linguistic analysis indicate transcultural interaction through the use of religious textiles, but it also confirmed Buddhist worship along the Northern Silk Road during the Uyghur period and the role of female donors, as I will show you later. The Turfan collection, like the Dunhuang collection, includes many items made with a combination of different textiles, as we have seen on the banner legs, also found in the Astana cemetery, as I mentioned before. So two of the best examples that show this form of recycling and the use of patchwork are a fragment with rosette, possibly part of a shoe, like those discovered in the Astana cemetery, and very popular among the Tang ladies. And also this kind of design is something that we found in textiles from the Shoso-in in Japan, and also found on a Buddhist pillow cover from Dunhuang. I'm sorry that is not a very high resolution, but you can see some of this fragment, and this is in the British Museum today. And again, a banner from Turfan there, with a combination of textile made in a sort of diamond shape that appear identical to another Buddhist pillow cover from Dunhuang, as you can see here. So the piece is particularly interesting because it records the ceiling of the first caves, which were painted as the beams of the roof opening of typical Central Asian architecture. And this is an example from Pakistan. So these ceilings should be seen as a first form of Buddhist mandala depicted in the cave for meditation. The word mandala in Sanskrit means circles, and they simplistically, I would say, they represent the universe. So the piece in particular, let me go back, okay. So both Turfan and Dunhuang offer many examples of banners and canopy, as we have seen, also painted, and sometimes include a cartouche, a special box to write a dedication rather than write an inscription randomly on the surface. So I have previously mentioned that the most popular banner shape is the triangular shape that represents a human body and was generally created with different pieces of textiles when not a single cloth was available. Some of these banners are extremely long and very well preserved, like we have, like those that we have the British Museum and the Victoria Albert Museum in London. They appear also depicted in painted banners, like another one from Dunhuang, where we can see Avalokiteshvara holding one of these triangular banners from the same period. Here you can see also an empty cartouche, which suggests that the banner was basically new and not used yet. So these types of banner, in fact, were mass-produced and ready to be completed with the final inscription for any possible use. So textile canopies or umbrella, however, also represent an interesting aspect of Buddhist visual and material cultures. They were used for processions as well as the banners, and they are also depicted in the murals. So in the Turfan collection, there are two fragmented big square canopies with repeating wooden block printed Buddha in front of a stupa, if you can see, which appears a type of pattern that appears also on murals from the Kizil caves, from the Bezeklik caves, and from wooden element. It's very faded there, but it's depicted on the stupa there. The collection, however, includes also other two examples of canopies that don't have a square form, but a roundel form that is very unusual, and we don't have similar example in Dunhuang, for instance. The first is the one from Tuyuk that is made with the Hongjin textile. That is a textile that we found in Tang sources, and it was very popular. It's a red textile with a grid or beaded rosette. And a similar Hongjin was found also in Astana, and a few years ago appeared on art markets in London. This latest one includes also a Vajra scepter motif, like the one that I put it there. As you probably know, the Vajra or thunderbolt is an element generally related to Tibetan Buddhist culture. And in this case, in this particular Hongjin will confirm a Buddhist use, but it was already mentioned in the Rig Veda as the weapon of God Indra. The second is a very small canopy. It's 5.5 inches. It's very tiny, probably used for a mini, for a figurine or a mini sculpture, which record the skirts of a Tang lady as they are depicted in wall painting and figurine from Astana. This particular female figurine is also wearing a top with beaded rondels that became one of the most popular motifs in the Taklamakan desert in Central Asia. But the interesting part is are the arms made with the recycled paper twisted into shape, which include also a pound ticket. One of those mentioned places name in the Tang capital in Chang'an. So again, most likely this was material that arrived in Turfan, or most likely this was produced in the capital and sent to Turfan. So as we have seen, canopy and ceilings were mutually represented. In Dunhuang, as we have many ceilings that do not just recall the opening of Central Asian architecture in the diamond shape, but also canopies with the big central flower. However, none of the canopy discovered in Dunhuang have a round shape, as I mentioned, like those from Turfan. Somehow, rounded canopy in the Turfan collection recall probably the dome of some caves in the basically Kizil, Kumtura, etc. And also in the Turfan collection, we have 3 examples of these canopies made in bamboo, hemp or cotton, and painted exactly like the domes of the caves. So although this cave in the museum in Berlin is a reconstruction that includes original painting, the original one are those in colors, and those in gray are the reconstruction made by the museum. As you can see, around the dome we have some pennants that again is the representation of a canopy or sacred umbrella. These pennants were very popular around the Silk Road. And in the collection, we have 3 different types from 3 different places, Tumshuk, Sanjim, and Kumtura. One is embroidered, probably a little bit later. But the most interesting of these 3 are definitely the one from Tumshuk that was discovered in the 4th expedition in 1914 and is identical also in size to those depicted around the bed of the Buddha in Paranirvana on a mural from Kizil Cave 171. This is what remained today of the painting. The rest got lost during World War II. So originally you could have the full picture. So when I was researching in Berlin, of course I had access to also to wooden elements, and these pennants, I noticed, appear on many, many elements from the caves. So again, on another stupa and on a board. The director of the museum reassembled a wooden structure from the caves in the storage. So this is an upside-down picture. As you can see, he reassembled everything on a chair. I twisted the picture to show you the structure. And it's very interesting because it includes many textiles motifs that I found in the Turfan Textile Collection. So we have the famous Sogdian leaves that was acquired by the Uyghur. We have a Greek key, a serpentine motif, the beaded roundel there. And all these motifs surround the image of a Buddha and also a cartouche with an inscription that most likely, according to Dieter Maue, that translated this for me, was a Sanskrit inscription in the Brahmi alphabet U concerning the scene below. Perhaps a namaskara or adoration that reads, so we the monk are known to homage to the theist, the Bhagavat. So, and as I said, I have to thank, these are not my translation, I do not read Sanskrit. So among many fragments gathered in the Buddhist caves, however, there are also many embroideries. And embroideries generally, when we deal with the textile collection, are the best examples. And at least in my opinion, are also those that are best preserved. The increase in the amount of embroidery is strictly related to the spread of Buddhism during the time period. The more detailed and finely stitched was the embroidery, and greater was the merit. Evidence of embroidery in Chinese culture can be dated back to the Shang period, but the technique reached popularity during the spring and autumn period and the warrior state period before the Han Dynasty, actually. So in the Turfan collection, we have different type of embroideries made in different type of stitches, and I'm going to show you just a couple, the chain stitches and the satin that slowly became very popular starting from the 9th century. Is relatively easy compared to the chain one. An interesting fragment is that I want to show you today is this one. Is very, very damaged, unfortunately, with different motifs. So we have dot, we have flower, we have flames, and we have what I call the umbrella-like flower that appear in many, many paintings. and other media, of course. So due to the size, it was not possible to detect the original shape or use, but we can see that it was made with the chain stitches. And we are talking about 1 centimeter, that is tiny like this, 1 square centimeters, just to give you the idea. Although mine is just a speculative interpretation, this pattern might have a symbolic meaning related to the esoteric Buddhism rather than just an ornamental role in the artistic composition. The Sutra of the Buddha Enunciation of the great Chundi Dharani, translated during the Tang by the Indian Tripitaka Divankara, introduces to the Dharani or spell and explains how it should be recited in front of a Buddha. The following 2 translations by Vajrabodh in 723 and his disciple Amoghavajra between 742 and 774 added the ritual manuals to the text from which the Dharani is recited. Interestingly, the ritual hand gesture of the Chundi Dharani very much resembled the pattern outline of the fragment embroidered in Berlin, as well as the urna, or divine mark, on the forehead of a Buddha sculpture in the museum gathered during the expedition. And here you can see, did I touch something? Okay. And here you can see the beaded randle with this kind of flames of also that symbolize the 3 actually fingers. The Chundi Dharani suggests also the use of flowers to adorn statues of Buddhas, which bring us to those found in Turfan as well as in Dunhuang, made of textile and papers, again, as possibly substitutes of real flowers. The flowers from Dunhuang were part of a canopy and very much recall those carved on the robe of one of the characters in the hunting scenes of Takebustan in Iran. So if we look carefully at the painting from basically caves, you can see this kind of umbrella flower depicted there. And one of the most interesting painting is the one in cave 21, where we can see a Uyghur male donor, a Uyghur female donors, and a Tibetan wheel of Dharma. The robe of these characters are very interesting, especially the male one, because it includes Rui motif. So the Rui was, in the Turfan collection, we have 2 examples. One is in the silk tapestry and the other one is embroidered. The Rui on the, it's a symbolic meaning that changed over the time. It was seen also as a Taoist fungus of immortality and later became a Buddhist scepter of authority. And the Qianlong emperor of the Qing dynasty, who was a fervent Buddhist, had a big collection of these Rui scepters like the one in the center. This is one of the many in the Palace Museum in Beijing. So the Uyghur female donor, in the same fashion, appears also embroidered on a small rag fragment. She is wearing a typical Uyghur female headdress with a phoenix, a long robe with a collar with a serpentine motif, and it is holding a long stem flower. Next to her, there is a child donor. The 2 on the fragment, however, are standing on a flower pedestal, like a lotus flower. And here you can compare the 2, the one from the painting and the one embroidered. So this fragment is part of a bigger composition with a central Maitreya Buddha embroidered in the same technique on an identical type of silk compound. This Maitreya is depicted with the mustache and Uyghur feature, and interestingly, in the same position of an early and rare Maitreya Buddha from the Kizil caves. Most likely, these 2 fragments, the Maitreya and the female donor with child, were part of the same composition that I picture as a triangular banner, as you can see there, like one of those discovered in Dunhuang and also in the Turfan collection. So based on the position of the female donor facing left, I imagined a group of male donor facing right. Also because I compare this image with those painted on banners from the same period. And this is a banner from Dunhuang with Avalokiteshvara, so it's not a Maitreya. You can see many empty golden cartouche. And you can see a female donor with a child on the other side on the left and two male donors on the other side, on the right, facing right. So as I previously said, banners were portable pictures, similar or identical to those depicted in the caves. So if we look carefully at the mandorla around the Bodhisattva, we will see a zigzag motif, or what remains of a zigzag, that is identical to those that appear around the Uyghur Buddha in the Pranidhi scenes from Bezeklik. Only one of the 12 scenes brought back to Berlin of these scenes, Pranidhi scenes, that means vow, survive, and is now in St. Petersburg. These scenes generally depicted a standing Buddha with Uyghur features surrounded by different ethnic people who worship him as a spiritual and terrestrial guide. In this one, this is not the one in St. Petersburg, but the one of those destroyed in Berlin, we can see a couple of possible Sogdians or other Western people offering to the Uyghur Buddha. Clearly, the detail of the embroidered Maitreya and the female donor with child, the use of gold, the rainbow halo, zigzag, and so on, suggests that the banner was produced in the same period and same style of the Bezeklik caves, and therefore is related to the Uyghur Buddhist period in Turfan. The Pranidhi scenes records also the spectacular giant embroidered banner from Dunhuang with Shakyamuni, now in the British Museum, and datable to the same period. However, the Turfan collection does not include such big and well-preserved banners. But amongst the many, there are a few fragments embroidered, again, in Chinese style, such as the head of a Buddha made in chain stitches that record the outline of Arochala Buddha and the hair of the medicine Buddha, both depicted in the High Cave near Kucha, near the Kizil Caves. And here you can compare the blue outline of the halo in both the embroidery and the painting. So big textile, as I say, a portable medium, but also very expensive, it clearly provided prototype of designs and pattern for Buddhist caves and temples. These in turn were so widely reproduced that became a common and accepted heritage in the whole Eurasian continent until the end of the Mongol period. There are many examples of textiles datable to the Tang period preserved in Japan as well as in European churches. The Shosoin repository and the Ryuji in Nara, in Japan, own some of the best pieces of the Tang artistic production, which show similar or identical pattern reproduced on different grounds. The repository collected items offered to the giant Buddha of Todaiji in the 8th century by Empress Komyo after the death of Emperor Shomu in 756, and also material from other repositories. Amongst the most important, there are a rug, a felt rug, and textile with the Baohua motif, which appear also on other items, such as the paiba, a type of lute that possibly arrived from Kucha, as well as textile with per randle or beaded randle. Generally, the beaded randle enclose animal in pair, but in this case, this piece frame a hunter, possibly a Sasanian ruler looking at the crown, riding a horse that has Chinese character depicted in the body. The Sasanian, as I said, were the last pre-Islamic Iranian dynasty that include many Central Asian territories, including Sogdiana. Many textiles with beaded randle were found along the Silk Road, and the motif was also used to decorate Buddhist caves. In this case, we have the pillow of the Buddha in Paranirvana, the skirt of a bodhisattva from the Sui dynasty, a decorative motif from the Kizil caves appear on the robe of the Toskarian knight in the Kizil caves again, or with the red hair. Many of these textiles, as I said, were traveled along the Silk Road and were also depicted later in Western Himalayas area, in particular in the region of Ladakh, present-day state of Jammu and Kashmir, and also Spiti Valley in the state of Himachal Pradesh, for partly part of the western Tibet, which were strategic point and contact zone between the Karakoram Highway and the Southern Silk Road, as you can see on the map, and still today connect India, Tibet, Pakistan, and so on. So not much has survived of the earlier artistic mural heritage. Among the most relevant, there are the Buddhist monastic complex of Alchi, Mangyu, Lamayuro, Sumdachung, and the grottos of Saspolts and Thabo and Narko Monastery in Ladakh and Spiti Valley, respectively. The date attributed to the wall paintings of these sites is still very controversial, some from the 10th or 11th century when all the complexes were most likely established, while others show evidence of a later production datable to the Mongol period, around the 13th and 14th century. In the early sites, such as the caves, the Saspol cave, for instance, we can find Buddhist figures enclosed in beaded randals. Both in the Sumtsek and the Dunhuang temples, in Alchi, we have character wearing robe with the randals, as well as resist-dyed compound. For instance, in the Sumtsek, at the entrance above the door, there is a sort of mural tanga depicting a Mahakala. Below on its right, looking at the picture there, we can see a daikini riding a horse. The daikini is wearing a robe with crossed felin motif, like those on a robe possibly from the Royal Tibetan tomb in Qinghai, China, and I give you a detail there. And the attendant instead is wearing an holding, an umbrella or a canopy in resist-dye textile, like the many fragments discovered in Turfan and Dunhuang, and also very popular in India. The daikini is not the only example with this robe, but in the Dunhuang and also in the same temple, there are other characters that are wearing a very similar textile, similar robe with this type of textile pattern. So. Also here, like in Buddhist caves, there was the use of covering the ceilings with textile pattern. In Alchi, the ceilings are covered with paper reproducing textiles. The use of covering the ceiling with textile is still very popular in Ladakh. This is a picture that I took a couple of years ago in the main monastery in Leh, and you can see how a Kashmir shawl is hanging from the ceiling, indeed. So the textile from Ladakh show a combination of Kashmir, Indian, Central Asian, and Turko-Iranian motifs that most likely were transmitted along the southern Silk Road through the Gilgit Pass and possibly also through Tibet. Amongst the various textile or textile patterns depicted, there are also the interlocked rabbit on the skirt of the giant Maitreya Buddha, sculpture in the Sumtsek, that we found also in Tibet and other areas. In this case, the skirts include geometric frame with 4 rabbits rather than 3. So the textile, this textile, I never found a textile like this related to this period, but for sure, we can link this pattern to the Dunhuang caves, to the early Dunhuang caves. So here, this is one of those created in the Sui dynasty, and here we have a lotus flower with the 3 rabbits. And we have probably, I would say 8 or maybe, 10, I don't think 10, but at least 8 caves with such type of patterns in Dunhuang. This motif became also very popular in Europe, and this is just one example from Germany. So the pattern became popular in Islamic world during the Mongol period, and possibly it substituted the Buddhist svastika. So this is the only example that we have from the Mongol period, from the Cleveland Museum of Art. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see, but there are roundel with 4 interlocked rabbits. This is not from the early medieval period again, but it's the only example that we have on textiles. So the motif, as I said, spread especially in the late medieval period, and it was possibly originally seen as a substitution of the Buddhist svastika, and once in the West it was seen as the shield of God, which included the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So there is no doubt that painting was a form of representation and presentation of people's daily social life, whether in a public space like a temple or a church or a palace, or in a hidden space like in a tomb. Mural depiction recreated social contexts that were supposed to be containers of physical objects and cultural identities. Nevertheless, in some cases, the images of gods and humans were outlined in the same way as one another, or were decorated with similar ornaments that highlighted the multiple uses or the recycled features of textile and accessories in religious as well as in laic spaces. Sometimes textile patterns depicted on wall were enlarged to create a spectacular effect that would not have had visibility if depicted in accordance with the original sites on textile. The gongda, literally merit, but also achievement and virtue, was applied to all kinds of Buddhist activity. Thus, the construction of a chapel or a monastery, the creation of a statue, or the organization of a Buddhist festival were all devotional activities addressed to Buddhist centers to create or decorate. In this regard, the quantity of banners, canopies, small bags, and flowers, mostly composed of different pieces of textiles as well as textile patterns in painting, like those that I have shown today, and datable to different periods, confirm the recycling process of materials and style employed mainly for making, offering, and ornaments. It is in this regard that through textile, Buddhists became visually and culturally more accessible along the Silk Road. Thank you very much.